His breath was hot against the back of my neck when he whispered it. "You're not here to love me. You're here to belong to me." And still, I didn't pull away. Not when his hand slid around my waist like it had every right to be there. Not when his voice, low and steady, claimed me the way his ring never could. Not even when I realized I wasn't resisting, I was surrendering. But here's what he didn't know. Ownership cuts both ways. If you're still listening, it means something in that silence reached you. So leave a like, let it linger, and subscribe for more stories that don't ask for your attention. They earn it. I had 17 minutes to walk away from my marriage. 18, if you counted the one I used to ruin everything. The courtroom was too bright for how I felt. Cold in that way air gets when it's been recirculated too many times, filtered, lifeless. I sat across from Graham in silence. My hands were cold. Not shaking. Not quite. But cold like they'd forgotten how to want warmth. He didn't look at me. Not once. He never really did. Not in the way people do when they're trying to find something behind your eyes. He just waited. Efficient. Detached. As if this was a board meeting and my name was just another line item to cross off. The judge's voice was calm. Practiced. "Mrs. Rutherford, do you consent to the dissolution of your marriage to Mr. Graham Rutherford?" The pen they gave me was heavier than it looked. Blue ink. The paper clean and white. My signature was expected. Neat. Final. A small act that would end a year and a half of quiet rooms, formal dinners, and days that passed like long, flat highways, in winter, and still, I didn't move. My lawyer leaned in, whispered, "It's okay, Annabelle, you can sign." But I didn't. I couldn't. Because something inside me, something stubborn and small and still breathing, refused to let this end without telling the truth. So I looked up at Graham. He was still looking straight ahead. His posture perfect. His expression unreadable, and I said, clear and steady, "No, I don't agree to the divorce." I think I heard someone inhale, a sharp breath just behind me. I felt it, the shift in the room, the silence that isn't really silence, but people rearranging their expectations. Even Graham blinked. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing for a long moment. Then she spoke in a voice softer than I expected. "Very well. The court will not proceed without mutual consent. It was done, not the divorce, but something." I stood slowly. I didn't wait for Graham. I just walked out. The hallway smelled like varnished wood, and something faintly metallic, maybe from the elevator buttons or the nerves in my blood. I stood near the windows, watching the wind play with the flags outside. He came out a few minutes later, not rushing, just there suddenly beside me, still not looking at me, but somehow present. "You had every reason to walk away," he said, his voice low. "I know. I thought you wanted to." "I did," I said. "I still might. But not today." He turned to face me then, and for once his eyes weren't cold, just tired. Why? I wanted to say something poetic, or strong, something that sounded like wisdom, like my mother might have said. But all I could manage was the truth, because I don't think we've finished saying what needs to be said. He didn't answer, but his shoulders dropped, just slightly. That was the first time he didn't feel like a stranger. We married almost 2 years ago. No flowers, no vows, just a courthouse, a signature, and an understanding. He would help pay for my younger brother's medical treatment, a bone marrow transplant we couldn't afford and didn't have time to wait for. And in return, I'd become Mrs. Graham Rutherford. In name, in appearance, in silence. It wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness. It was transaction. But I agreed. I was 21. My mother had just died, and the world felt like a house with all the furniture missing. He was cold, but clear, unsentimental. That felt safe at the time. The first night in his home, his mansion. I remember walking past portraits of people I didn't know. His ancestors, I assumed. All sharp suits and proud brows. I didn't feel like I belonged there. I didn't even feel real. He left me alone most nights, ate dinners in his study, worked until late. The few times we spoke, it was always in perfect sentences, as if we were rehearsing a play neither of us had auditioned for. But he was never cruel, never unkind, and that was harder than hate. That night, after the court, I made tea. Earl Grey. The same kind my mother used to drink when she needed to. Think. The smell of bergamot filled the kitchen. I took my cup to the study. Not because I expected him to be there, but because I didn't want to be alone. He was. Standing by the window, hands in his pockets, jacket still buttoned. I hesitated in the doorway. "I thought you might have left," he said without turning. I almost did. I set the cup on the side table. He walked over, looked at it, then looked at me. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted. "You, staying." "You don't have to do anything," I said. "Just don't disappear." And then he nodded. It was the smallest movement, but it meant everything. Later, in my room, our room, though we never really used that word, I found a small wooden box on my pillow. It wasn't wrapped. No note. Just the box. Inside was a coin. Silver, worn smooth on one side. My mother's. Lucky coin. I had lost it the day of her funeral. I picked it up carefully. Underneath, in his handwriting, were 5 words. "I've kept this for you." I held it in my palm for a long time, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not because I was hurt, but because I realized I wasn't alone in remembering what mattered. He knocked on my door that night. Not loudly, just 3 soft taps, like he was asking the silence for permission first. I was sitting at the little writing desk by the window. The room was warm, lit only by a single lamp with a faded cream shade. Outside, the wind curled through the garden trees, the same way my mother used to braid my hair, slow, deliberate, and a little too tight near the ends. "Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't sure what kind of yes it would be. Eventually, I said, "You're already halfway here. You might as well." He stepped in and stood just inside the doorway. His posture was formal, as always, but his tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. He looked human. "You didn't sleep much last night," he said. It wasn't a question. "I haven't slept well in months," I replied. He nodded, as if he already knew. Maybe he did. Then he asked, almost gently, "Would you have dinner with me?" I stared at him. For a second I thought he meant some kind of charity event or business function. But then I saw it, on his face, that little flicker of vulnerability that appeared only when he wasn't sure what to expect. "You mean, now?" I asked. He nodded. "I thought we stopped doing that after the first week," I said. "We never started." The dining room in Rutherford Hall is larger than it needs to be. The chandelier alone looks like it belongs in a European opera house. But tonight, the lights were dimmed. Just the candles on the table were lit. The rest of the room fell into soft shadows. He'd cooked. I was so startled by that, I actually laughed a little. "Didn't peg you for the roast chicken type," I said. He gave a half shrug. "There are things you don't know about me." I sat. The chair felt colder than usual, but the smell of rosemary and garlic warmed the air. There were no servers, no wine poured by someone in uniform, just us, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a deal being negotiated. "Do you remember the night your mother died?" he asked after a while. The fork froze halfway to my mouth. I set it down slowly. "Yes," I said. "Of course. I watched you, From the other side of the chapel. You were trying to hold everything together. For your brother. For the guests. For her. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I wanted to speak to you that day. He continued. But I didn't know how. So I left the offer instead. I looked at him then. Not the man in headlines or at boardroom tables. Just the man sitting across from me. Wearing an apron over his shirt, one cuff still splashed with marinade. Trying, in his own awkward way to offer something real. Why now? I asked. Why tonight? He didn't look away. Because I never wanted to divorce Annabelle. I wanted a way out of the lie we both agreed to live. I pushed the plate away. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't want this to be just a moment. I wanted to remember it clearly. You said you didn't want love. I didn't, he said. Back then, love cost me something I wasn't ready to lose again. There was weight behind those words, not melodrama, just truth, and I remembered what I'd found in his office. The voided license, the letter that was never sent. Who was she? I asked softly. He didn't flinch. She was supposed to be my wife, but I waited too long. I offered her everything, except what she needed most. Certainty. And now? He smiled. Barely. A crack in the frost. I'm not sure what I'm offering you yet, but it's not silence anymore. After dinner, I walked past the room I never entered, the one on the west side of the house with the frosted glass doors and heavy velvet curtains. It used to be his mother's studio. That much I knew. But it had always been locked. Untouched. Tonight, it was open. A soft light spilled out. Not bright, not beckoning. Just warm. I stepped in. It smelled like old books, oil paint, and something citrusy, lemon, balm maybe. The windows were dusty, but the light filtered in golden and heavy, like it had waited a long time to be seen again. On the desk I found a sketch, half finished, a woman's face, eyes lowered, not smiling, but peaceful. She used to paint. You, Graham said behind me. I turned. He stood in the doorway, watching me the way someone watches a fragile vase wobble on a shelf, ready to catch it. Or mourn it. I didn't know she even noticed me, I whispered. She noticed everything. That's why I locked this room. I wasn't ready to notice what she saw. The silence between us felt full, not empty, like a page waiting for the next line. He took one step forward. I've kept too many doors shut, he said. But this one, I opened it for you. I didn't answer. I just stood there, the smell of lemon balm rising, and the sketch still unfinished, under my fingertips. Something in me wanted to cry. Not from sadness, but from the way hope sometimes hurts when it comes back too suddenly. That night, I didn't close my bedroom door. And when I looked back just once before turning in, I saw it. The studio light, still glowing softly across the hall. A room that had stayed dark for years, now lit again. It's strange how quickly we can start to hope again, even after we've trained ourselves not to. The morning after that quiet dinner, I woke up before the sun. I didn't even realize it at first. I just knew the room felt different, lighter, like something invisible had been lifted off my chest during the night and hadn't returned. I pulled the blanket closer around my shoulders, still curled up, in bed, and listened. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could hear distant footsteps. One set. Familiar. Measured. Graham. He always moved like a man who knew exactly where he was going, even when he didn't. I made tea and brought it out to the garden, where the air still held that clean, wet scent of morning dew. The sky was bruised, purple and soft pink. And for a moment, I forgot why I'd ever felt unwelcome here. When he joined me, he didn't say anything at first. Just sat beside me on the bench, our elbows not quite touching. It was the kind of silence I used to fill with overthinking. Now it felt almost gentle. "Did you sleep?" he asked. I nodded. "I think so." He handed me a folded newspaper. "You made the society column again. They think your refusal to divorce me is part of some power play." I rolled my eyes. "Let them think whatever they want." He smiled, just barely. "That's new." "What is?" "That fire in you. I missed it." I turned to him, and for the first time, asked the question that had haunted me since the day we married. "Why me, Graham? Why did you choose me for this arrangement?" He looked straight ahead, as if the answer were somewhere in the trees. "Because you didn't ask for anything," he said quietly. "You never begged, never pushed, never tried to impress me. You just were." And somehow, that answer broke something open inside me that I didn't realize I'd locked. Later that day, I wandered into the west wing of the house, somewhere I'd avoided for months, out of habit or fear, I wasn't sure. The studio door was still open, and the light still on. Inside, the air smelled like memory, like cedar wood and old pages and faint perfume. I moved slowly, as if walking through someone else's mind. The sketch of the woman was gone. In its place was a canvas covered in cloth. I didn't lift it. I couldn't. Some things ask for patience. Some things need to stay unknown just a little longer. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something else. A drawer half open, a file left out, and inside it, a letter. Typed, official, stamped. Marriage annulment agreement. Dated 3 weeks ago. My name, his signature. Filed, but not submitted. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Betrayal? A little of both? He hadn't told me. He'd made it look like he was letting go. But he wasn't. I found him in the greenhouse. Tending to plants I didn't know he cared about. He was wearing gloves, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his fingers. "You filed for annulment?" I asked. No preamble. He didn't flinch. Didn't look surprised. "I did," he said. And then, "I didn't send it. Why?" He set the shears down, wiped his hands, and finally looked at me. "Because I wrote that when I thought you'd never sit beside me at dinner again. I thought I was setting you free." I stepped closer. "Why not just tell me?" His voice was quiet. "Because I was afraid you'd thank me." That answer made me ache in a way I couldn't quite name, because I understood it. There's a kind of loneliness that hides itself behind logic and clean breaks. The kind that pretends walking away is noble when, in truth, you're just terrified. No one will stay if they truly see you. I took the gloves from his hand and set them aside. "I wouldn't have thanked you," I said. He nodded, like he believed me, or wanted to. That night, I sat at the desk in my room and wrote a letter I never planned to send. To my mother. I told her what I'd seen, what I'd felt, how the man I'd married for duty had turned out to be more human, more fractured, and maybe more worthy of love than I expected. I told her about the garden, the tea, the studio, and I told her about the fear. The fear that, if I let myself fall for him now, I'd never recover if he left again. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer, next to the coin he had returned. Before I went to bed, I passed by his office. The door was ajar. He wasn't inside, but the fireplace was lit, and on the desk was a photograph, black and white, slightly curled. It was of me, laughing, from 2 years ago at a charity event I barely remembered attending. I wasn't looking at the camera. I was mid-laugh, hair loose, holding a glass of something sparkling. He had kept this, all this time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. But I understood, in that quiet moment, that I had never really been invisible to him. And somehow, that changed everything. The house had a way of holding its breath when something was about to break. That morning, I felt it. I'd just stepped out of the shower, the towel still wrapped around my hair, when I heard the voices, quiet, muffled, but sharp enough to cut through the hall outside my room. Not arguments, not shouting, but a tension that rang clearer than any raised voice. I opened the door just slightly, enough to hear the end of a sentence spoken by Graham's head of legal. Miles, I think his name was. Always too smooth, too rehearsed. And if she finds out, it could undo everything. My breath caught. Graham didn't answer right away. Then, low and clipped, I'm aware. You should have destroyed the file. I couldn't. You mean you wouldn't? A pause. Then footsteps. Silence again. By the time I stepped into the hallway, they were both gone. But the stillness stayed behind like smoke after a fire. I didn't go after him. Not immediately. Instead, I went to the one place in the house where things made sense. The kitchen. I brewed tea with hands that didn't want to tremble. I gripped the edges of the counter until my knuckles ached. I reminded myself of all the things I already knew about Graham. The walls he built, the way he carried regret like a second suit. But this was different. This was a secret. And it had my name written in its shadow. That evening, I didn't touch my dinner. I sat at the table, watching the steam curl from my cup, and waited. He came in late. Tie loosened. Face tired. The look of a man who'd fought a battle he couldn't tell anyone about. And lost. I didn't stand. Didn't smile. Who was the file about? I asked, calmly. He closed his eyes for a moment, then walked over and sat across from me like someone sitting down in a confessional. You heard us. I did. He nodded once, like he'd expected this to happen eventually. There's something you should know, he said, about your mother. My chest tightened. Graham. He held up a hand, not to silence me but to steady himself. I never had an affair with her, he said, but my father almost did. I blinked. What? She worked for him. You knew that. But you don't know how close it came to something more. She ended it before it began. But my father, he didn't take rejection well. I felt my pulse, hammering in my throat. He threatened her? No. But he made her life here very difficult. She left quietly, with you, and I didn't know the truth until I found the letter she wrote before she died. A letter addressed to me. He pulled something from his pocket. A folded page, aged, soft around the edges. She said she forgave my family, that she didn't want the past to shape my future, that you deserved better than the shadows we'd cast. I stared at the letter. My name wasn't on it, but I could see her handwriting from where I sat. She had loved deeply, and suffered silently, just like me. He didn't ask me to forgive him, but he didn't hide either, and that somehow was more powerful. I reached for the letter with slow hands, afraid it would vanish if I blinked. Reading it was like hearing her voice again, firm, loving, unafraid. You may think I hated you, Graham. I didn't. I pitied you. A boy raised by power, not people. If you ever love someone, truly love them. Give them what your father never gave me. The truth. I folded the letter and set it down. Then, looked him in the eye. You kept this from me. Yes. Why? Because I didn't want you to see me the way you see him. I stood slowly, walking past him, to the window that overlooked the garden. The sky was turning the color of copper and bruises, sunset coming too fast. You're not him, I said, but you are still hiding. He said nothing, so I asked the question that had burned under my skin since I heard that conversation. What else is in that file? There was a long pause. Then, it's not about your mother. It's about you. I turned around. What do you mean? He swallowed hard. When I first approached you with the offer to marry, it wasn't a coincidence. I knew about your family's debt, about Tim. I had someone investigate you. Thoroughly. My breath hitched. So I was a project? No, he said quickly. You were a lifeline. But I didn't see that at first. His voice cracked, just slightly. The first crack I'd ever heard in it. I was trying to fix something broken in me. I thought if I helped you, maybe I wasn't beyond repair. But then you walked into my life and didn't ask for anything. And I didn't know how to let that in. The words hurt, but not in the way I expected. Not betrayal, not shame. More like grief. For both of us. For everything this marriage could have been if we'd just started with honesty. I don't need you to save me, Graham, I said, but I needed you to see me. I do now, he whispered. And for once, I believed him. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rustle through the trees outside. Somewhere down the hall, I knew he was doing the same. 2 people in 2 rooms, both wide awake. Both holding pieces of the truth they didn't know how to live with yet. But maybe not running from it anymore. I left the house before sunrise. I didn't leave a note. I didn't send a message. I didn't even tell Graham I'd be gone. I just packed a light coat, a scarf, and the coin he'd returned to me, and walked out the front door like I belonged to myself again. The driver asked where to. I said, the red house on Montgomery Street, South Side. He didn't question it. Maybe my voice told him not to. The house hadn't changed. It was still red, still peeling in the same corners. The porch steps still creaked on the second one down, and the wind still rushed through the alley between it, and the bakery like it was in a hurry to forget something. But everything around it felt smaller now. The gate leaned a little farther. The mailbox hung open. And the jasmine my mother once trimmed with bare fingers now wrapped wildly around the fence, as if no one had dared stop it since she passed. I stood at the front door a long while before knocking. I don't know why I knocked. No, one had lived there since we left. Inside, the air smelled like old fabric and time. That kind of dusty sweetness you only get from rooms where nothing new has happened in a while. The walls still held the nails where our family pictures used to hang. The light switch by the entry still stuck on the first try. And in the kitchen, God. The kitchen. The small dent from where Tim had dropped the kettle that burned his arm was still there, near the corner. I had screamed. My mother had rushed in with cold water, and the calm voice only mothers can conjure under fire. She had sung to him that night, her voice cracking, soft. I remembered every word of that lullaby. I made tea on the old stovetop with a packet I'd brought in my coat. The kettle took longer than it should have, but waiting in that silence, surrounded by everything we had once been, felt like a kind of penance. And when it finally whistled, I turned to the drawer I'd avoided for years, the third one down, under the wooden spoons and the loose batteries. There, it was, the little velvet pouch, my mother's. I used to think it was jewelry, something valuable she didn't want us touching, but when I opened it now, my breath caught. Inside were 3 things. A photograph of her and a man I didn't recognize. Young, bright-eyed, in black and white. A charm bracelet I'd never seen before. And a folded page. The handwriting was hers. I'd know it anywhere. Annabelle, if you found this, it means you've come home looking for something. Maybe answers. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe just peace. There are things I didn't tell you. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I wanted to protect the girl you were, and trust the woman you would become. Love isn't made of certainty. It's made of courage. And the only thing more dangerous than loving the wrong person is not loving at all. Choose with your eyes open. But don't be afraid to choose. I folded the letter and held it against my chest like it could fill the hollow space that still ached under my ribs. I stayed in that kitchen for another hour, drinking tea, letting myself feel everything I'd spent 2 years burying. When I returned to Rutherford Hall, the sun was setting in amber waves across the long driveway. The house looked gold in the light. Not cold. He was standing on the front steps, sleeves rolled up, like he'd been pacing the stone for hours. He didn't speak when he saw me. Didn't scold. Didn't sigh. Just exhaled like someone finally found the missing half of a sentence. "I went home," I said, as I climbed the steps. "To the old place." His eyes flickered. "You went alone." "I had to." He nodded. "And did you find what you were looking for?" "No," I said. "But I found what I needed." I pulled the letter from my coat pocket, held it for a second, then slid it into his hand. "She wrote to me too," I added. "But it's not just for me." He unfolded the paper and read in silence. When he looked up, his voice was rough. "She was braver than both of us." "Still is," I said. We didn't talk much that evening, but the silence felt clean now. Not heavy, not scared. After dinner, he walked me to my room, and at the threshold he stopped. "I didn't sleep last night," he admitted. "I know. I kept thinking about that day we signed the contract. You didn't flinch, not even once." "I was terrified," I said. "But not of you." "Then what?" I hesitated, then told him the truth. Of what it might mean if I wanted it to. Be real. He stepped back like the words had hit him physically, and then he laughed, quiet, disbelieving. "You think I wasn't terrified too?" he asked. And just like that, the years of distance cracked. Just a little. Just enough to breathe through. That night, I didn't close the door to my room. And just before midnight, I heard his footsteps pause outside. He didn't knock. He didn't enter. But he stayed there, just outside the frame of the doorway, for a long time. Long enough to let me know he wasn't leaving. Not yet. The first cold front of the season arrived just after midnight. The wind slipped through the windowsills, like a whisper that wouldn't leave me alone. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, watching the sheer curtains breathe in and out against the moonlight. I didn't know if Graham was asleep. I didn't know if I wanted him to be. All I knew was that something had shifted since I came home, not with declarations, not with promises, but with presence, with stillness, with the space he gave me to find my own voice, even if it meant stepping away from him. I found him in the library the next morning, not reading, just standing there, holding an old leather-bound volume he wasn't really looking at. He looked up when I entered. "You always come in quietly," he said. "I wasn't trying to surprise you." "I know. You're just not made of noise." I smiled faintly. "Is that a compliment?" "It is now." He closed the book gently and placed it back on the shelf. "You said once that silence scared you," he added. "It used to. But now, I think I just didn't know how to listen to it." He nodded, and then said nothing at all. We spent that day circling each other, not avoiding, not retreating, just orbiting. I spent the morning in the conservatory, tending to the neglected orchids. He worked in the study, phone pressed to his ear, murmuring in clipped, careful tones. We met once in the hallway. He stepped aside for me. I didn't pass. We stood like that for a breath longer than we needed to, then kept walking. That night, the house was quiet again, but not asleep. I felt it, before I heard it, footsteps across the floor above mine, slow, deliberate, then silence. Then a door opening, not mine, his. Then, a minute later, too fast, too loud, another door, the front one. I rose instinctively. Something was wrong. I found him in the foyer, suit jacket off, shirt wrinkled. He wasn't wearing shoes. He was sitting, on the floor, his back to the staircase, elbows on his knees, hands locked in his hair like he was trying to hold his own head together. "Graham?" He didn't look up. "I messed up," he said, so quietly I barely heard it. I stepped closer. What happened? They called tonight. The investors. He laughed once, bitter. They think I've gone soft. That this marriage is making me sentimental. Weak. I knelt beside him. You're not weak. I let them believe I didn't care about anything. That made me powerful. He finally looked at me. And then I married you. I didn't speak, because sometimes silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's the only thing strong enough to hold grief. I didn't mean to fall for you, Annabelle, he said, voice rough. You were never supposed to be real. You were supposed to be safe, controlled. He took a shaky breath. But then you stayed, and you smiled in rooms full of ghosts. And you listened to things I didn't say out loud. And now I can't unsee you. His hand found mine. Not demanding, not possessive. Just there. Warm, uncertain, wanting. I don't know how to be loved by someone who sees through me, he said. I answered softly. Then don't look away. He dropped his gaze. I'm terrified. So am I. He exhaled like the weight of the entire year had finally caved in around him. Then, without a word, he moved to his knees in front of me. Not for show. Not for drama. Just because some truths require your whole body to say them. I don't deserve you, he whispered. I cupped his face gently. No one earns love, Graham. We just choose it. Or we don't. He closed his eyes. And in that moment, there on the cold marble floor of his perfect house, his breath uneven against my wrist, I saw the man behind the title. Not the CEO, not the heir, not the contract. Just Graham. And I loved him. Quietly. Wholly. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't touch more than hands and breath and the space between words. But it was more intimate than anything I'd known. Because for the first time, he let me hold what he always hid, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Later, as we sat on the floor side by side, our shoulders touching, I asked the question I'd been afraid to voice for weeks. Did you marry me to own me? His reply came after a long, long pause. No, he said. I married you to control the narrative, to fix something broken in my name. But I stayed married to you because... He trailed off. I turned to him. Because? His voice cracked just once. Because I didn't know who I was without you. And maybe that was the truest thing he'd ever said. The letter arrived the next morning. No courier, no signature. Just a white envelope, slipped under the front door like a secret too ashamed to knock. I found it first. There was no name on the front. Just the logo of the Rutherford Group, embossed in gold. I knew that logo. I'd signed it on forms, seen it on donation plaques, worn it on the edge of a name tag during a gala I hadn't even wanted to attend. But this envelope felt heavier than paper. I carried it into the kitchen like it might shatter if I moved too fast. Graham walked in just as I was slicing it open. He stopped mid-step when he saw it. You weren't supposed to see that, he said. Too late. Inside were 12 printed pages, legal language, shareholder concerns, proposals for restructuring, and at the bottom, a formal motion calling for Graham's removal as CEO. I stared at the last page. It didn't shake in my hand. But something in me did. You knew this was coming, I said. I did. And you weren't going to tell me. I didn't want you to feel responsible. You married me to fix your image, Graham. If you lose everything now, that's still about me. No, he said quietly. It's about me not being willing to let them have all of me anymore. We sat at the breakfast table in silence, the envelope between us like a third presence in the room. He ran a hand through his hair. I told them I wouldn't go through with the divorce, that I was stepping away from press obligations, that I was focusing on us. And that made them panic, I said. It made them think I was compromising the company for emotion. Are you? He looked up. I don't know. Maybe. His honesty didn't shock me anymore. but it still bruised something tender inside me. I stood, walked toward the window where the morning light filtered through the garden leaves in soft gold. The same garden where I'd first begun to feel like this house could be something more than marble and memory. I could feel his gaze on my back. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about sacrifice," I said. "And whether it's brave or just another kind of cowardice." He stood, crossed the room in 2 strides. "You think I'm doing this to make you feel guilty?" "I think you're doing this because, for once, you're choosing something real. And that scares you." He exhaled sharply. "And you?" I turned to face him fully. "I'm scared too. But not of loving you." Later that day, I went to the greenhouse alone. The air was warm, damp, fragrant with soil and citrus. I needed somewhere to breathe without looking brave. Among the rows of orchids and lavender and tiny lemons that hadn't ripened yet, I finally let myself cry. For him, for me, for every version of us that could have existed if the world had been simpler. And then, I did something I hadn't done since I moved into this house. I picked up a notebook and started to write. If you lose everything, will I still be enough? If I choose you now, do I give up what I could become on my own? And if I walk away, will I spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I had stayed? The questions weren't tidy. They never are. But when I looked up and saw Graham standing in the doorway, his suit rumpled, eyes raw, I knew the answer to at least one of them. I didn't want to wonder anymore. That night, I asked him to sit with me by the fireplace. No words, no agenda, just us. The sound of logs crackling, the scent of cedar, the quiet weight of choosing. To be in the same space without fixing anything. He poured 2 glasses of wine but didn't toast. I drank slowly, and when the fire burned low, he turned to me and said, "I'll step down." My heart caught. "You will?" "I can rebuild a company," he said. "But I can't rebuild us if I lose you trying to prove I don't care." We didn't speak for a long time. Then I said softly, "I didn't fall in love with a CEO, Graham. I fell in love with the man who knelt on the marble floor and told me he was scared." He looked at me like he was memorizing the words. "You still want this?" he asked. "This house?" "No. This life. With me. Without all the armor." I reached out and took his hand. "Only if you promise to stop hiding behind it." We didn't make any vows that night. No grand declarations. But in the space between our hands, something old broke quietly, and something real began. The house was quiet that morning. Not silent, not hollow, just settled, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for 2 years. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot, watching the kettle hiss on the stove, the same stove I once feared touching, the same kitchen I'd tiptoed through like a stranger. Now, I reached for mugs without thinking. I knew where everything was. Not because someone told me, but because I'd lived it into muscle memory. Somewhere down the hall, Graham was still asleep. For once, I didn't feel the need to rush in and match his pace. He had stepped back from the company 2 days ago, just like he said he would. It made headlines for a full 24 hours, but then the world moved on. Funny how quickly people forget power when you no longer cling to it. I carried the tea to the garden. The bench was cool, damp with early morning dew. The jasmine along the fence was in full bloom again. I reached out and plucked a tiny flower, twirled it between my fingers. This was the same garden where I had first realized I could breathe here. Now I didn't just breathe, I belonged. He found me just after sunrise. He didn't say anything at first, just stood behind me, arms crossed gently in front of him, watching the sky turn amber. Then, in that voice that was always calmest when it came from the heart, he said, "Would you believe me if I told you I've never felt more like myself than I do in this exact moment?" I looked up at him. I would. He sat beside me, close enough that our arms touched. "Do you regret it?" I asked, stepping down. No, everything. Us. He turned to me fully. Regret isn't the word. There were moments I wish I had handled differently. But you? Us? He paused. You are the one part of this I would never undo. Later that day, we walked through the old rooms of the house, one by one. He opened closets I had never touched, dusted shelves he'd stopped noticing. In the west wing, we passed the studio again. The light was on, as it always was now. Inside, the canvas that once stood covered was no longer hidden. I walked toward it slowly, and stopped. It was a painting, of me, not posed, not smiling, just sitting in the window seat, hands in my lap, looking out into the garden, my hair loose, eyes distant, as if I'd been caught in a moment I didn't know was being seen. You started this a long time ago, I said. Yes, but you never finished it. He stepped closer. I didn't know how. I turned to him. Do you now? His eyes met mine. Yes. That night, we didn't talk much over dinner. We didn't need to. There's a kind of silence that grows, only after storms have passed, the kind that wraps around you like a familiar quilt. A silence that says, you've made it through. We lingered in the dining room long after the plates were cleared. He refilled my glass of water. I reached over and fixed the crooked collar on his shirt. Little things. Small, quiet touches. But that's where love lives, I think. Not in grand gestures, not in whispered declarations under moonlight, but in the mundane, the day-to-day, the reaching for someone without asking if it's safe to do so. Before bed, he joined me in the room that used to feel too large for just one heart. We didn't close the door behind us. We didn't undress each other in a rush. Instead, we moved, slowly, carefully, like the first time, but with none of the distance. His hands on my skin weren't claiming this time. They were remembering, learning, choosing. And when he pressed his forehead against mine afterward, breath still uneven, he whispered, something I hadn't known I needed to hear. Thank you for staying long enough for me to become the man you deserved. We didn't say forever. We didn't need to, because some promises are too big for words, and some loves don't arrive with lightning. They grow in silence, in second chances, in hands held through fear. A week later, we planted a lemon tree in the garden. He dug the hole. I set the roots. We watered it together. Neither of us said it, but we both knew what it meant. Not a new beginning, not a clean slate, just life, growing, side by side. And when I looked down at my hand that night, the ring still resting there, not as a contract, but as a choice, I finally understood what my mother meant when she wrote, "Choose with your eyes open." I had seen every shadow in him, and I stayed anyway. If this story touched you, even in the quietest way, leave a like to let us know you're here. And if you'd like more stories that linger long after the final word, consider subscribing. Your support helps us keep telling the ones worth hearing.